What's going on, music creators? It's your boy Fly Guy J, and I'm back with another video. Now, on this episode of Wavy Wednesdays, I'll be going over a basic mixing technique that's often overlooked, but is a critical first step in making sure you don't end up with a mix that clips, distorts, and sounds nasty. This step is called gain staging, and today I'll be showing you how you can use the WavesVU Meter to get your levels right on your 2-track instrumental before you record or before you start your mixing session. If you're new to my channel, or if you're interested in learning more about mixing and mastering or how to use certain plugins, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you can get notifications of future videos. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so like I just mentioned, the first step towards a good mix is to make sure that your levels are correct coming in, and then also maintaining that the levels are correct as you begin to mix, record, add different plugins, add new vocals, etc. to your track. You want to make sure you have proper gain staging so that you're giving yourself enough headroom during the recording and the mixing process to add new tracks or use plugins to modify your audio tracks in order to compress, EQ, saturate, raise the level, etc. without clipping, which causes a nasty distortion and ultimately ruins your mix. So in order to understand where our levels are, there's two plugins I like to use for metering. First being the WavesVU Meter, which we'll go ahead and load now on our master channel. Multi-channel plugin, sound field, VU meter. The VU stands for volume units, and it's basically a standard for measuring your input signal level. By default, it's calibrated to the analog sweet spot of -18, which you can see here, which basically means that when this meter is hitting 0, you're actually at -18 dBFS, which is decibels full scale. In simplest terms, what that means is when this meter is hitting 0 on your VU meter, if you have it set to 18, then you'll actually be hitting -18, so somewhere around here on the meter that you see in your DAW. The second meter that I like to use is a peak meter. Let's go ahead and insert a peak meter. In Pro Tools, I usually go for the PAZ meter. Now this is measuring the peak, the highest points in your signal. In the digital world, we want to make sure that we're not peaking above 0. So as long as we stay under a peak of 0 dBFS, then we won't get any clipping and we won't be introducing any nasty sounding distortion into our project. So just to recap, I like to use the VU meter to get kind of an average sound, something that's more realistic to what the human ears. And then I like to use a peak meter to see what the actual highest point our signal is hitting. So now that I've explained these two meters, let's go ahead and loop a section of the beat where the kick and bass are, and we'll take a loop at what our meters are doing. All right, so you can see on our VU meter, we want to be aiming towards 0, which at times we're hitting, but we're also pegging the meter out above 3. So we definitely want to reduce the gain of our beat, our 2-track. And on our peak meter, we're maxing out at -0.5. This basically means we're not clipping, we're not introducing any nasty audio distortions. However, once we start adding vocals to this beat, once we start boosting our EQ or compressing and making things louder, we have a very limited ceiling to work with. We only have 0.5 decibels of headroom to do anything to this track. So here's a common mistake or misunderstanding that a lot of people have about gain staging. A lot of people will simply take this fader and say, okay, I'm going to lower this minus to -6 dB. And they'll say, okay, I just generated 6 dBs of headroom. But in reality, that's not the case. What you have to realize is that this fader is only accounting for the volume after any plugins that have been inserted here. So it works from top down. So you have to remember our incoming signal has only 0.5 decibels of headroom. So for example, let's go and throw that peak meter onto the beat track. We'll put one at the top of the chain, and we'll put one at the bottom of the chain. And let's say on this beat, we wanted to do an EQ boost. So let's say we wanted to use Waves EQ-P1A. I'll show you a quick example of how simply lowering the fader of the volume will not give you more headroom. So we have our initial peak meter showing the incoming signal of our beat here. Then I have an EQ, which we will boost. Let's take 60 hertz and let's boost it, I don't know, 5. And then this meter here is our peak metering after the EQ. So let's go ahead and play this back. And there it is. You can see in the actual plugin that we're clipping here. The red light indicator is clipping in our EQ plugin. This tells us that the sound coming out of our EQ plugin is already clipping, it's already distorting. Our incoming signal was peaking at -0.6, but as soon as we boosted the EQ on one plugin, we're now clipping, as you can see by this red indicator light. And now the signal leaving our plugin is clipping, which you can see by the peak meter here. We're now at 3 decibels above 0. So now let's go back and I'll show you the correct way to do the gain staging. All right, so I'll pull up our VU meter again, and I'll pull up our peak meter. And in Pro Tools, there's 2 quick ways that you can reduce the gain of your track. The first way is to simply click on this fader button here, which is on the waveform. Click and drag it either down to decrease the gain or up to increase the gain. So I want to give myself at least -6 decibels of headroom to begin with. So let's go ahead and drop this down to about -6 dBs. Now let's play back that same loop and see where we stand with our metering. All right, so now you can see we have much more headroom to work with. We're peaking at about -7.1. And on our VU meter, we were hovering around 2 to 3 VUs, and we were hitting 0 once or twice during that loop. So this is a great level to start with. We can now go ahead and start recording vocals over this track, or if you're mixing a track, you can import the vocal stems and then start gain staging your individual vocal tracks. Now that we have that extra headroom created, let's go ahead and throw that EQ back on and then see where our metering is after the EQ boost. So we'll go back to that EQ-P1A. We'll go to 60 hertz again. We'll boost it 5. And now let's play back that loop and see where we are with our metering. So this is our meter before the EQ. This is our meter after the EQ. Now you can see from our metering, by doing that EQ boost, we went from a peak of -7 dBs to a peak of about -3.6 dBs. So now we're able to add that EQ boost through our Pultec EQ without causing the clipping and the distortion. The second important part about gain staging, once you have the initial level set, it's important to remember to always gain stage throughout your mix. And what I mean by that is you can clearly see that we've gained about 4 dBs, 3.5 dBs once our audio passed through this Pultec EQ. So you always want the volume going in to be relatively the same as the volume leaving your plugin. That way you're preserving that same amount of headroom throughout your mix. And by the time you get done adding 4, 5, 6, however many plugins, you're still going to have that headroom. Another important reason for keeping the volume going in equal to the volume going out I've said it in other tutorials, but our ears trick us. Whenever you hear something louder, you automatically assume that it sounds better. In order to get a true understanding for what a specific plugin is actually doing to your audio, you need to make sure the volume is the same going into it as it is coming out of it. That way you can get a true representation for how the plugin is changing your sound. So on this particular plugin, we have a gain knob, and we can compensate for the increase in gain by decreasing this gain knob. So let's go ahead and do that. Without the plugin, with the plugin. So it's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can see we're still about 0.2 decibels louder. We were at -7.2 and now we're at -7. And that's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to overkill and get OCD with it. But at the end of the day, you don't want to hear a drastic difference between the before and the after. The second way of increasing or decreasing the gain is, instead of using the gain fader on the waveform, you can insert a trim plugin. So let's say this plugin didn't have a gain knob on it. What we could do in order to maintain that gain before and after the plugin is we could insert a trim plugin after our EQ plugin. And now we can change the gain of the audio signal by either decreasing or increasing the slider. So let's say we didn't have this gain knob. We'll change this back to 0. And then we'll go to our trim plugin and I'll decrease it by -3.4 here. Now we'll play it back. And you can see we have that 0.2 decibel difference again. So it's just another way to increase or decrease your gain in order to maintain your gain staging throughout your mixing process. All right, so once you have your beat gain staged properly, the next step would be setting your gain staging on your preamp. If you're using any analog hardware for recording your vocals, for example, I use an Avalon M5 preamp when I'm tracking vocals, you'll probably see a VU meter somewhere on that preamp. And one quick tip for you is, if you are recording through one of these preamps, you'll want to set the gain on your preamp so that you're always hovering around 0 VU. By doing that, you'll have an incoming audio signal that's not too hot and not too low. If it's too high, then you risk the clipping and the audio distortion being introduced to your vocal. And once that distortion is recorded in, you can't really take it out. If you have it too low, then when you amplify that signal inside your DAW, you'll also be amplifying and boosting any of the unwanted artifacts that are introduced from the noise floor of your equipment, like hissing or humming. If you're not using any analog gear that has a VU meter on it, I would suggest throwing a VU meter on the insert track of your audio track. And when you're setting up your tracking for your vocals, keep an eye on your VU meter and make sure when you're recording that incoming vocal, you're hovering around 0. It's okay if you go over a little bit. It's okay if you're under at times. You're going to have a dynamic performance. So sometimes you're going to be below, sometimes you're going to be above. But you just want to make sure, one, you're not clipping, you're not peaking. This, red indicator light is not coming on to indicate that you're going over the signal. And to the best that you can, just try to hover around 0. A lot of us modern music creators aren't really paying attention to that -18 dB golden spot. I'll give you 2 reasons why you still should aim for that -18 sweet spot. One, if you use any plugins that emulate analog equipment, such as, let's say, a SSL EQ or that Pultec EQ I just had pulled up. Those plugins are designed to emulate the actual hardware. And the sweet spot for those hardware units, in order to get the best sound out of them, you want to have the incoming signal coming in around 0 VU or negative 18 dBFS. In the digital realm, can you send those signals into the plugin hotter and still get, a good sound that's not going to clip? Yes, you can. But if you want to get the best emulation of that plugin, why wouldn't you send it in at the recommended ideal input level? Reason number 2 is if your audio signal is going to be leaving your DAW at any time to go to an analog equipment. For example, let's say you're sending your mix from your DAW to a analog summing mixer. The ideal level going into that mixer is going to be 0 VU. So long story short, it's best practice to use a VU meter for your gain staging. Set it where 0 VU equals negative 18, and you'll have plenty of headroom in your mix. I hope you guys found this quick gain staging tutorial helpful, and I hope you will implement these gain staging techniques into your recording sessions and your mixing sessions in order to improve the sound quality of your final mix. If you enjoyed the tutorial, make sure you click that thumbs up button, drop a comment, and let me know what your gain staging techniques are. How much headroom do you like to have in your mix before you start tracking your vocals? Lastly, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that bell so you can get notifications of my next video. For those of you who are interested in purchasing this WavesVU Meter, I'll leave a link in the description. If you are going to buy any of the plugins that you see in my tutorials, do me a solid and make sure you click that link before you purchase it. By doing so, I'll receive a small commission at no extra charge to you, but what it does is support my channel by allowing me to review more plugins and bring more tutorials to you guys. Until next time, keep learning, keep creating, and keep grinding. I'm out.